The chains felt cold against 8-year-old Marcus's wrists as the alien guards dragged him through the massive stone corridors. His small feet barely touched the ground as the towering Zephyrian warriors carried him toward what they called the sacred chamber. Their gray skin gleamed under the flickering torchlight, and their forearms made quick work of securing the heavy iron shackles around his ankles. Marcus had stopped crying hours ago. The tears had dried up somewhere between watching his parents get executed and realizing that no one was coming to save him. The Zephyrians had invaded Earth 6 months ago, and humans were nothing more than cattle to them now. But Marcus was special, they said. He was pure, untouched by the corruption of adult fear and hatred. "The Ancient One grows restless," growled Commander Vex, his mandibles clicking with each word. 300 years since the last proper sacrifice. The dragon's hunger threatens our very existence. The other guards nodded solemnly. They had seen what happened to planets that failed to appease Morvoth the Eternal. Entire civilizations turned to ash and bone. The Zephyrian Empire had survived for millennia by feeding the ancient beast, and they weren't about to stop now just because they had to use a human child. The massive doors to the sacred chamber groaned open, revealing a cavern so vast that the ceiling disappeared into shadow. Stalactites hung like frozen tears, and the air itself seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. At the center of the chamber lay Morvoth, coiled like a mountain of midnight black scales. Each scale was the size of a dinner plate, and when the dragon breathed, the entire chamber trembled. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. But something strange happened as he stared at the massive creature. Instead of terror, he felt curious. The dragon's eyes were closed, but even in sleep, power radiated from its form like heat from a furnace. This was what the aliens feared so much? This was what had kept an entire galactic empire bowing and scraping for centuries. "Place the offering at the dragon's snout," Commander Vex ordered. "Step back immediately after. Do not look into its eyes when it awakens." The guards approached slowly, reverently. They had done this before with other species, other children. The ritual was always the same. The dragon would wake, consume the sacrifice, and grant the Zephyrians another century of protection. It was a small price to pay for survival. They set Marcus down on the cold stone floor and retreated to the chamber's edge. The boy stood there in his torn earth clothes, looking impossibly small against the dragon's massive form. His blonde hair caught what little light filtered down from above, and his blue eyes remained fixed on the sleeping giant. "Wake, Ancient One," Commander Vex called out in the old tongue. "We bring you sustenance. We honor the covenant our ancestors made." Morvoth's eyes opened slowly, revealing orbs of molten gold that seemed to contain the fury of dying stars. The dragon's head rose from the ground, scales scraping against stone with a sound like grinding mountains. When it spoke, its voice echoed through dimensions that mortal minds could barely comprehend. "Another offering," the dragon rumbled, its breath washing over Marcus like a warm wind. "How many centuries has it been, little Zephyrians? How many worlds have you conquered in my name?" 300 years, Great One," Vex replied, prostrating himself on the cold floor. "We have expanded your dominion to 17 systems. Billions bow before your might." The dragon's gaze shifted to Marcus, who still hadn't moved or looked away. Most offerings would be screaming by now, begging for mercy or trying to run. But this small human simply stood there studying Morvoth with an expression of disappointment. "And what manner of creature is this?" Morvoth asked, lowering his massive head until he was eye level with the boy. "I do not recognize this species." "Humans, Great One," Vex explained. "A primitive race from a backwater world. They possess no significant technology or psychic abilities, but this one is young and pure, untainted by the corruption of experience." Marcus finally spoke, his voice small but clear in the vast chamber. "You're not what I expected." The words hit the assembled Zephyrians like a physical blow. No offering had ever spoken to the dragon before, let alone criticized it. Commander Vex felt his heart stop beating as he waited for Morvoth's inevitable rage. The dragon could incinerate them all with a single breath. But Morvoth did not unleash his fury. Instead, he tilted his massive head, studying the boy with newfound interest. "And what did you expect, little human?" "Something more," Marcus said simply. "They were so scared of you. Made you sound like the most terrible thing in the universe. But you're just another bully, aren't you? Taking food from people because you're bigger and stronger." The dragon's eyes narrowed, but not with anger. There was something else there. Amusement? Curiosity? You think me a bully? My dad always said bullies are just scared kids who got too big for their own good, Marcus replied. Are you scared of something? Commander Vex couldn't believe what he was hearing. The child was going to get them all killed. He started to move forward to silence the boy before he could anger the Ancient One further. But Morvoth's tail swept out, creating a barrier between the Zephyrians and the human child. Stay back, the dragon commanded. I wish to hear more from this one. Morvoth lowered himself further, bringing his massive head down to Marcus's level. Up close, the boy could see that the dragon's scales weren't just black. They held depths of color like oil on water, swirling with purples and deep blues and hints of starfire silver. Tell me, little human, Morvoth said, his voice gentler now. What do you know of fear? Marcus thought for a moment. I know it hurts. I know it makes people do terrible things. I know it made these aliens kill my mom and dad. His voice cracked slightly on the last words, but he pressed on. And I know it's making you eat kids instead of finding your own food. The dragon was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, Marcus heard something unexpected. The great beast's breathing was labored, strained. There was pain hidden beneath all that power. You're hurt, Marcus said suddenly. That's why you make them bring you food. You can't hunt anymore. The truth of it hit Morvoth like a physical blow. This child, this insignificant human creature, had seen through millennia of carefully constructed terror in mere moments. The dragon's pride warred with something he hadn't felt in centuries, the desire to be understood. The Zephyrians watched in stunned silence as their ancient god lowered his guard before a human child. Morvoth's ancient eyes studied Marcus with an intensity that made the air itself shimmer. No creature had spoken to him with such directness in over 3,000 years. The last being to show him anything approaching honesty had been another dragon, now long dead and turned to cosmic dust. You see much for one so small, Morvoth rumbled, his voice carrying undertones of surprise. But seeing and understanding are different things entirely. Marcus stepped closer to the dragon's massive head, ignoring the sharp intake of breath from the Zephyrian guards. My grandpa was like you once. He got hurt in a war and couldn't work anymore. Made him real angry. He yelled at everyone who tried to help until they stopped trying. The dragon's golden eyes widened slightly. And what became of your grandfather? He died alone, Marcus said simply. Mom said he was too proud to ask for help and too scared to let people love him. Commander Vex watched this exchange with growing horror. The child was somehow managing to have a conversation with Morvoth instead of being devoured. This wasn't how the ritual was supposed to go. The dragon was supposed to consume the offering and return to sleep for another century. Instead, the Ancient One seemed genuinely engaged with the human boy. Great One, Vex ventured carefully. Perhaps we should proceed with the ceremony? The planetary alignment won't remain optimal for much longer. Morvoth's head swung toward the Zephyrian commander with a speed that belied the dragon's massive size. Did I ask for your counsel, little general? No, Great One, forgive me. Tell me, Morvoth said, turning back to Marcus, what makes you think I require help? I am Morvoth the Eternal, devourer of worlds, the flame that burns between stars. I have existed since before your son was born. Marcus looked around the vast chamber, taking in the ancient stone and the way everything seemed designed to keep the dragon contained rather than comfortable. If you're so powerful, why do you live in a cave? Why do you let them lock you up down here? The question struck like a lightning bolt. For the first time in millennia, Morvoth felt something crack in the wall of lies he had built around himself. The truth was ugly, shameful, and utterly at odds with the image of terrible power he had cultivated. I am not locked up, the dragon said, but his voice lacked conviction. This is my domain. My choice. Then leave, Marcus challenged. If you don't like taking food from them, go somewhere else. Find your own food. Be free. Morvoth's massive form shuddered, and for a moment Marcus saw through the facade. The dragon's breathing was indeed labored, and now that he looked closer, the boy could see places where scales had fallen away, revealing scar tissue beneath. One of the dragon's wings was folded at an odd angle, as if it had been broken long ago and never healed properly. You can't fly anymore, Marcus said with sudden understanding. That's why you stay here. You're trapped. The words hit Morvoth like a physical blow. His massive head lowered until it rested on the stone floor, and for the first time in 3,000 years, the eternal dragon looked his age. The last great war, Morvoth whispered, his voice barely audible. Dragons fought dragons while lesser species cowered. I was overly confident, overly proud. My opponent's death strike shattered my wing and poisoned my blood. I fell from the stars into this world, broken and dying. The Zephyrians had never heard this story. Their historical records spoke only of the day Morvoth had arrived and demanded tribute. They had assumed it was conquest, not desperation, that had brought him to their world. The early Zephyrians found me, Morvoth continued, nursed me back to something approaching health. But the damage was too great. I could no longer fly between worlds, could no longer hunt the cosmic storms for sustenance. So I made a bargain. Protection in exchange for food. Marcus sat down cross-legged in front of the dragon's massive snout, completely unafraid. But you got better, didn't you? At least some, Morvoth admitted. Enough to maintain the illusion of power, but never enough to leave, never enough to be what I once was. So you've been stuck here for thousands of years pretending to be scary so they'll keep feeding you. The simplicity of it, laid bare by a child's words, made Morvoth want to curl up and disappear. Yes, Commander Vex felt his worldview crumbling. The Ancient One, the being his entire civilization had revered and feared, was admitting to weakness in front of a human child. It was unthinkable, impossible, and yet it was happening right before his eyes. That's really sad, Marcus said, and his voice carried genuine sympathy. You must be really lonely. Loneliness. When had Morvoth last considered that emotion? Dragons were typically solitary creatures, but this was different. This was isolation born of deception and shame. He had surrounded himself with fearful subjects who saw him only as a source of power or destruction. None of them knew him. None of them cared about him beyond what he could do for them. The Zephyrians worship me, Morvoth said defensively. No, they don't, Marcus replied with the brutal honesty that only children possess. They're just scared of you. That's not the same thing. The dragon's eyes closed as the truth of it settled over him like a heavy blanket. 3,000 years of worship had been nothing more than elaborate fear management. The Zephyrians didn't love or respect him. They simply calculated that feeding him was easier than fighting him. What would you have me do, little human? Morvoth asked, opening his eyes to look at Marcus again. I am what I am. I cannot change the nature of dragons any more than you can change the nature of humans. My mom used to say that being stuck isn't about where you are, Marcus replied. It's about where you think you can go. Maybe you can't fly between stars anymore, but that doesn't mean you can't go anywhere. Marcus stood up and walked closer to Morvoth's massive head, reaching out to touch one of the great scales. It was warm beneath his palm, like touching a sun-heated stone. Besides, the boy continued, maybe being grounded isn't so bad. Maybe there are good things down here you missed when you were flying around up there. For the first time in millennia, Morvoth found himself genuinely curious about something other than his own misery. This human child had managed to cut through layers of pride, fear, and self-deception with nothing more than honest questions and simple observations. You speak as if you know something of being trapped, Morvoth observed. Marcus's hand stilled on the dragon's scale. My parents are dead. These aliens destroyed my whole world. I'm probably going to die today. But I'm not scared anymore because you're not what I thought you'd be. You're just hurt and lonely like me. The parallel struck Morvoth with unexpected force. Here was another being torn from everything familiar, facing an uncertain future with remarkable courage. The difference was that Marcus faced his fate with honesty, while Morvoth had hidden behind layers of deception. Commander Vex shifted nervously at the chamber's edge. This conversation had gone on far too long. The ritual should have been completed by now, and yet the dragon showed no signs of consuming the offering. If anything, the Ancient One seemed to be drawing strength from the child's presence rather than preparing to devour him. The silence in the sacred chamber stretched like a held breath. Morvoth's ancient mind raced through possibilities he hadn't considered in centuries. This human child had managed to see through his carefully constructed facade in minutes, revealing truths that the dragon had buried under millennia of pride and pain. Tell me about your world, Morvoth said suddenly. Before they came, what was it like? Marcus's eyes lit up despite their current circumstances. It was beautiful. We had blue skies and green grass and oceans that went on forever. My dad used to take me fishing in a little boat. He said the fish were just as curious about us as we were about them. And your people? Were they warriors like the Zephyrians? Some were, Marcus admitted. But mostly we were just people. We built things and learned things and took care of each other. Well, most of the time. Sometimes we fought too, but we were trying to get better at the taking care of each other part. Morvoth found himself genuinely intrigued. In his travels across the galaxy, he had encountered countless species. Most were either warlike conquerors or cowering prey. Few seemed to possess the simple complexity that Marcus described. My dad always said humans were good at two things, Marcus continued, figuring stuff out and not giving up. Even when things got really bad, we'd find a way to keep going. And yet your world fell to the Zephyrians. Marcus shrugged, a gesture that somehow conveyed both acceptance and defiance. They had bigger guns and more ships. But that doesn't mean they were better than us. It just means they were better at breaking things. Commander Vex couldn't contain himself any longer. Great one, the ceremony must be completed. The alignment of the planets. Morvoth's head whipped around with such speed that several Zephyrian guards stumbled backward. Commander, tell me something. In all your historical records, have you ever wondered why I never ask for anything beyond food? What do you mean, Ancient One? Other beings of my power demand tribute. Rare metals, artwork, knowledge. I have only ever asked for sustenance. Have you never questioned why? Vex's four hands gestured uncertainly. We assumed it was because food was all you required for your magnificence. Morvoth's laugh was like distant thunder. You assumed wrong. I ask for nothing else because I am too weak to protect anything else. A dragon who cannot defend his horde is no dragon at all. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled Zephyrians. Their entire understanding of their relationship with Morvoth was built on the assumption that he was an all-powerful being who chose to demand only food out of some incomprehensible preference. But the worlds you've destroyed, another guard stammered, the fleets you've incinerated. All civilizations that were already dying, Morvoth admitted. Poisoned worlds, broken fleets, species on the verge of extinction. I have been living on borrowed reputation for 3 millennia, sustaining myself on the fear of past glory. Marcus listened to this exchange with growing understanding. You've been pretending to be stronger than you are so they'd keep helping you. Yes. But what happens when they find out you're not as scary as they thought? It was the question that had haunted Morvoth for 3,000 years. The Zephyrians' loyalty was built entirely on fear. Without that fear, what reason would they have to continue feeding him? He would become nothing more than a burden, a relic to be discarded. I suspect they would no longer see value in our arrangement, Morvoth said carefully. Marcus turned to look at Commander Vex and the other guards. Is that true? If he couldn't protect you anymore, would you just let him starve? The question hit the Zephyrians like a physical blow. They had never considered their relationship with Morvoth in terms of mutual benefit, rather than divine obligation. The idea that the Ancient One might actually need their help rather than simply demanding it was revolutionary. The Ancient One has protected our empire for millennia, Vex said slowly. His power has kept us safe from threats we cannot imagine. But what if he couldn't do that anymore? Marcus pressed. What if he was just a hurt, lonely old dragon who needed friends instead of servants? The boy's words sparked something in Morvoth that he had thought long dead. When had he last had a friend? Even among his own kind, relationships had been based on territorial agreements or mutual advantage. The concept of genuine companionship, of beings who valued him for something other than his power, was almost alien. Humans are strange creatures, Morvoth observed. You form bonds with those who cannot benefit you. Your species is known for caring for its weak and elderly, for protecting those who cannot protect themselves. It's not strange, Marcus replied. It's just the right thing to do. Besides, taking care of each other makes everyone stronger. And yet it also makes you vulnerable. The Zephyrians conquered your world precisely because you wasted resources on non-productive members of society. Marcus's eyes flashed with anger for the first time since entering the chamber. They conquered our world because they were bullies with big ships. And just because they won doesn't mean they were right. The fire in the boy's voice reminded Morvoth of something he had almost forgotten. There was a difference between strength and power, between victory and righteousness. The Zephyrians had power. But this small human possessed a strength that their entire empire couldn't comprehend. You speak of right and wrong as if they were absolute truths, Morvoth said. Aren't they? Marcus challenged. Killing my parents was wrong. Destroying my world was wrong. Making people live in fear is wrong. Some things don't change just because someone bigger disagrees. The dragon found himself nodding slowly. And what of my actions? Have I been wrong to accept tribute for protection? Marcus considered this seriously. I don't think making deals is wrong. But lying about what you can do? Making people scared when they don't need to be? That's not right either. Then what would you have me do? Reveal my weakness and lose even this small measure of security? Tell the truth, Marcus said simply. Maybe they'll surprise you. Maybe they'll help you because it's the right thing to do, not because they're scared. Commander Vex listened to this exchange with growing amazement. The human child was suggesting that the Zephyrian Empire, built on conquest and maintained through fear, might choose compassion over calculation. It was an almost laughably naive suggestion, and yet as Vex looked at his fellow guards, he saw something unexpected in their expressions. The revelation of Morvoth's vulnerability hadn't bred contempt or the desire to exploit weakness. Instead, there was something that looked almost like concern. Ancient One, Vex said carefully, if what you say is true, then our empire has been built on a foundation of deception. Yes, but our worlds are still protected. Our people still prosper. Does the source of that protection matter if the result is the same? Morvoth considered the question. What happens when I am truly gone? When age or injury finally claims what little strength remains to me, will your empire survive without the threat of my retaliation to maintain order? It was a sobering thought. The Zephyrian Empire had grown complacent over the millennia, relying on Morvoth's reputation to prevent rebellion and deter invasion. Without him, their military might be insufficient to maintain control over 17 star systems. Perhaps, Marcus interjected, you could teach them to be strong without being scared. Help them figure out how to protect themselves instead of depending on you. The suggestion was so radical that it left both Morvoth and the Zephyrians speechless. The idea of transitioning from a relationship based on fear and tribute to one based on mutual cooperation and shared strength was almost incomprehensible. The weight of Marcus's suggestion settled over the chamber like a blanket of snow. Morvoth had spent 3,000 years as a fearsome deity, accepting worship and tribute from beings who saw him as either salvation or doom. The idea of becoming a teacher, a partner in growth rather than a source of terror, was so foreign that it made his ancient mind reel. You suggest I transform from a god to a mentor? Morvoth said slowly. Do you understand what you're asking? Marcus tilted his head, studying the massive dragon with those impossibly honest blue eyes. I'm asking you to be yourself instead of pretending to be something you're not. That's not really that hard, is it? For a dragon who has lived in deception for millennia, it may be the hardest thing imaginable. Commander Vex stepped forward cautiously. Ancient One, if I may, what the human child suggests isn't entirely without precedent. There are species within our empire who contribute knowledge and expertise rather than simply paying tribute. The Andromedans with their stellar engineering, another guard added. The Crystalline Collective with their communication networks. They're valued allies, not just subjects. Morvoth's golden eyes widened slightly. In all his years of accepting tribute, he had never considered that the Zephyrians might view some relationships as partnerships rather than simple domination. But those species chose to ally with you, Morvoth pointed out. They weren't conquered and forced into submission. Actually, Vex said carefully, the Andromedans were originally a conquered world. But after 2 centuries of occupation, we discovered their expertise in stellar mechanics was so valuable that we offered them full alliance status. They've been willing partners ever since. Marcus clapped his hands together, a sound that echoed strangely in the vast chamber. See? People can change their minds when they're treated better. The dragon pondered this. And what makes you think the Zephyrians would accept such a change with me? I have been their terrifying master for 3,000 years. To suddenly become their wounded ally? Maybe they won't, Marcus admitted. But maybe they will. You won't know unless you try. It was such a simple statement, yet it carried the weight of revolution. Morvoth realized that in all his long existence, he had rarely taken risks that weren't born of desperation or pride. The idea of making himself vulnerable by choice, of trusting others to respond with kindness rather than exploitation, was terrifying in a way that no enemy had ever been. Tell me, Commander, Morvoth said. turning his massive head toward Vex. If I were to reveal my true condition, my limitations and my needs, how do you believe your people would respond? Vex was quiet for a long moment, his 4 hands clasped behind his back as he considered. Honestly, Ancient One, I believe there would be fear at first. Not fear of your power, but fear of losing your protection. Our empire has many enemies who have been held in check only by the threat of your retaliation. And after that initial fear, I think many would want to help. You've been more than our protector, Ancient One. You've been our symbol of strength and endurance. To learn that you've been carrying burdens all this time, maintaining our safety despite your own pain. There's honor in that. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. That's what I'm talking about. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is ask for help. Morvoth felt something shift inside him, like a massive stone finally rolling aside after millennia of pressure. And what of you, child? What do you gain from encouraging this revelation? The question seemed to surprise Marcus. I don't gain anything. I'll probably still die today, but maybe you won't have to keep pretending anymore. Maybe you can have friends instead of just people who are scared of you. The dragon's ancient heart, which had beaten alone for so long, seemed to skip. This human child was facing almost certain death, and yet his concern was for Morvoth's emotional well-being. It was a level of selflessness that the dragon had only heard about in legends. You truly believe you're going to die? Marcus shrugged. That's what happens to sacrifices, right? I mean, I hope not, but I'm not stupid. They didn't bring me here to make friends. The casual acceptance of mortality, combined with genuine concern for others, struck Morvoth as perhaps the most heroic thing he had ever witnessed. This child possessed a courage that had nothing to do with power or strength and everything to do with character. What if I told you that I haven't actually consumed a sacrifice in over 1,000 years? The words hung in the air like a revelation. Commander Vex felt his heart stop. What? Morvoth's great head turned toward the Zephyrian commander. The last offering I actually ate was a Gorillian war priest who attacked me with a crystal blade. Self-defense, really. Since then, I've simply pretended to consume the offerings and transported them to an uninhabited world in the outer system. But there were never any reports of survivors, Vex stammered. Because I threatened them with death if they ever returned or attempted to contact their homeworlds. Most were so grateful to be alive that they built new lives on that distant planet. It's become quite a thriving colony, actually. Marcus's face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd shown since his capture. You saved them? All of them? I am many things, little human, but I am not a monster. The fear of consumption served my purposes without requiring actual murder. Then why didn't you just tell them? Marcus asked. Why keep pretending? Morvoth was quiet for a moment. Because I was afraid they would stop caring about me if they knew I wasn't the terrible destroyer they believed me to be. I thought fear was the only thing keeping me from complete abandonment. But that's not true, Marcus said firmly. Commander Vex and his people don't look like they want to abandon you. They look like they want to understand you. The dragon looked around the chamber at the assembled Zephyrians. Their expressions had indeed changed over the course of this conversation. The fear was still there, but it had been joined by something else. Curiosity, concern, perhaps even the beginnings of genuine respect. Ancient One, Commander Vex said slowly, if what you're telling us is true, then you've been protecting our empire while carrying this burden alone for millennia. That's not weakness, that's incredible strength. Strength born of deception? No, Marcus interjected. Strength born of caring. You could have just eaten everyone and been done with it. Instead, you found a way to keep everyone safe while staying true to who you really are. That's not weak or wrong. That's amazing. For the first time in 3,000 years, Morvoth felt something that might have been pride in his choices, rather than shame for his circumstances. This human child had managed to reframe his entire existence, showing him that survival and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. There's something else, Morvoth admitted. Something I haven't told you about the colony world. What? Marcus asked eagerly. It's not just the former sacrifices living there anymore. Over the centuries, they've been joined by refugees from worlds the Zephyrians conquered. Beings who chose exile over subjugation. The planet has become a haven for those who seek to escape imperial rule. Commander Vex felt the blood drain from his face. You've been harboring our enemies? I've been protecting beings who posed no threat to your empire but couldn't live under your rule. There's a difference. The revelation should have been devastating, but somehow it wasn't. Looking at Morvoth now, Seeing the genuine care in the ancient dragon's eyes, Vex found himself wondering if perhaps their empire's approach to conquered worlds had been too harsh. The sacred chamber had become something entirely different from what it was meant to be. Instead of a place of fear and ancient ritual, it had transformed into a space where truth was slowly unraveling, 3,000 years of carefully maintained lies. Morvoth watched the faces of the Zephyrian guards as they processed his revelations, and for the first time in millennia, he found himself genuinely curious about their response rather than simply expecting their fear. A refugee world, Commander Vex repeated slowly, under your protection. Yes, they call it Haven now. Population roughly 2 million, representing 47 different species. They've developed quite an impressive agricultural system, actually. The former sacrifices taught survival skills to the refugees, who brought various technologies and knowledge from their home worlds. Marcus sat down cross-legged on the stone floor, completely absorbed in the story. What's it like there? Morvoth's expression softened as he spoke about the world he had secretly nurtured. Different from anything I've seen in my travels. They have no central government, no military hierarchy. Decisions are made by consensus, conflicts are resolved through mediation. They've created art, literature, music that blends traditions from dozens of worlds. It sounds beautiful, Marcus said with genuine wonder. It is. And it exists because I was too weak to consume the offerings as expected, too proud to admit my deception, and too compassionate to allow innocence to die for my survival. Commander Vex struggled with the implications of what he was hearing. Ancient One, by harboring these refugees, you've essentially been undermining our imperial authority for centuries. Yes, Morvoth replied simply. And I would do it again. The admission should have triggered outrage, demands for punishment, threats of retaliation. Instead, Vex found himself asking why. Because conquest without mercy breeds only hatred and rebellion. Because some beings simply cannot thrive under imperial rule, no matter how benevolent you believe yourselves to be. Because diversity of thought and culture makes the galaxy richer, not poorer. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. That's what my dad used to say about Earth. He said the best parts of being human came from all the different ways people could live and think and create things. Your father sounds like he was a wise man, Morvoth observed. He was. He said the universe was big enough for everyone to find their own way of being happy. The dragon's ancient eyes closed as he absorbed the simple profundity of that statement, a philosophy that stands in direct opposition to imperial expansion. Maybe, Marcus said. Or maybe there's a way to have an empire that doesn't squash everyone flat. Maybe you could have an empire that helps people instead of just ruling them. Commander Vex felt his worldview continuing to crack and reshape itself. You speak of helping rather than ruling. But how does one maintain order across 17 star systems without clear authority? Through partnership, Morvoth said suddenly, the idea crystallizing as he spoke. Through mutual benefit rather than fear. Through the understanding that an empire's true strength lies not in its ability to destroy, but in its capacity to nurture and protect. Like what you did with Haven, Marcus added. You didn't rule those people. You just kept them safe and let them figure out how to be happy. The parallels were undeniable. Morvoth had accidentally created a model for everything the Zephyrian Empire could become, a system based on voluntary cooperation, mutual aid, and respect for diversity rather than forced uniformity. Ancient One, Vex said carefully, what you're describing would require a fundamental transformation of everything we are. Our military structure, our economic systems, our entire understanding of imperial authority. Yes, it would. It would be seen as weakness by our enemies. Other empires would view it as an opportunity to attack. Would they? Morvoth asked. Or would they see an empire strong enough to change, adaptable enough to grow, confident enough to lead through example rather than fear? Marcus jumped to his feet, excited by the direction of the conversation. Plus, you'd have allies instead of just scared subjects. People would want to help defend something they actually cared about. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, but Vex remained skeptical. The logistics alone would be staggering. How do you govern diverse species with different needs, different values, different definitions of justice? The same way Haven has done it for centuries, Morvoth replied. Through conversation rather than decree, through compromise rather than conquest, through the understanding that unity doesn't require uniformity. But our current systems, Are failing. Morvoth interrupted gently. How many rebellions have you faced in the past century? How many resources are devoted to suppressing dissent rather than encouraging growth? How many brilliant minds are wasted because they don't fit your imperial mold? The questions hit home because Vex knew the answers. The Zephyrian Empire spent enormous resources maintaining control over unwilling subjects. Entire fleets were dedicated to patrol duty. Entire worlds were garrisoned against rebellion. Entire generations of brilliant beings were either imprisoned or executed for the crime of thinking differently. You're talking about revolution, Vex said quietly. I'm talking about evolution, Morvoth corrected. The choice between growing into something better or gradually dying as something that no longer serves its purpose. Marcus looked between the dragon and the commander, sensing the weight of the moment. You don't have to decide everything right now. You could start small, maybe with just one world, see how it works. Haven, Vex said suddenly. You're suggesting we start with Haven? Why not? Marcus asked. They're already doing what you're talking about. You could learn from them instead of being scared of them. The idea was so radical that it made Vex's head spin. The thought of the Zephyrian Empire learning from refugees and former sacrifices, of treating them as teachers rather than problems to be solved, challenged every assumption he had about imperial authority. What would we tell the High Council? Vex asked. How do we explain that we've discovered our ancient protector has been secretly nurturing a refugee world in direct violation of imperial law? You tell them the truth, Marcus said simply. That sometimes the best way to be strong is to be kind. That sometimes the best way to lead is to listen. That sometimes the best way to win is to make sure everybody gets to be happy. Morvoth found himself marveling at the child's ability to distill complex political and philosophical concepts into simple, undeniable truths. The boy speaks wisdom, Commander. The question is whether your people have the courage to embrace it. And what of you, Ancient One? Are you prepared to abandon your role as feared deity to become, what, an advisor? A teacher? A friend, Morvoth said softly. For the first time in 3 millennia, I would like to try being a friend. The word hung in the air like a prayer. Commander Vex realized that in all his years of service to the Empire, he had never heard that particular concept applied to relations between different species. Allies, subjects, enemies, vassals, but never simply friends. It won't be easy, Vex warned. There will be resistance from traditionalists, fear from those who profit from the current system, skepticism from those who believe that strength must always manifest as dominance. Most good things aren't easy, Marcus pointed out. My mom used to say that if something was worth doing, it was worth doing even when it was hard. Morvoth nodded slowly. Then perhaps it's time for this old dragon to do something worth doing, regardless of the difficulty. The decision crystallized in that moment, born from the honest words of a human child, and nurtured by the possibility of genuine transformation. 3,000 years of fear-based rule were about to end, not with violence or collapse, but with the radical notion that empires could choose to evolve. The transformation began immediately, though not in ways anyone expected. Word of the unusual ceremony spread through the Zephyrian capital like wildfire. Stories of the human child who had spoken truth to the Ancient One, of revelations that shattered millennia of assumed knowledge, of a dragon who had chosen compassion over consumption for 1,000 years. Within hours, Commander Vex found himself standing before the High Council, trying to explain events that seemed impossible even to him. The circular chamber buzzed with confused whispers as the 12 council members processed his report. You're telling us, said High Counselor Theron, her 4 arms gesturing in disbelief, that Morvoth the Eternal has been secretly maintaining a refugee colony instead of consuming sacrifices? Yes, High Counselor. And that he admits to being significantly weaker than we believed? Yes. And that this revelation came about because an 8-year-old human child asked him if he was lonely? Vex paused. Put that way, it did sound absurd. The child has an unusual gift for seeing truth through deception, High Counselor. Counselor Zane, military advisor to the Empire, leaned forward aggressively. This is clearly enemy manipulation. The humans must have conditioned the child specifically to undermine our relationship with the Ancient One. With respect, Counselor, humans had no knowledge of our relationship with Morvoth before we conquered them. They couldn't have prepared such a manipulation. Then it's natural human cunning, Zane insisted. They're trying to weaken our protector to leave us vulnerable to attack. Marcus, who had been brought to the council chamber despite Vex's protests, spoke up from where he sat between two guards. I wasn't trying to trick anybody. I just thought he looked sad. The simple statement cut through the political speculation like a blade. High Counselor Theron studied the small human with newfound interest. Sad? The Ancient One appeared sad to you? Really sad, Marcus confirmed. Like my grandpa after Grandma died. All angry and mean because he hurt too much to be nice. The comparison was so unexpected that it left the council speechless. None of them had ever considered that Morvoth might experience emotions like grief or loneliness. They had assumed he was above such mortal concerns. Where is the Ancient One now? Theron asked. Still in the sacred chamber, Vex replied. He's asked to speak with the full council when you're ready to hear him. And the refugee world? This haven? According to Morvoth, it's thriving. 2 million beings from 47 species, living in voluntary cooperation without central authority. Counselor Nix, the Empire's chief economist, shook her head. Impossible. Such diverse populations require strict hierarchical control to prevent chaos. That's what I thought too, Vex admitted. But the Ancient One describes a functioning society that has created new forms of art, technology, and governance through cooperative effort. Marcus raised his hand tentatively. Can I say something? The council turned to him in surprise. It was unprecedented for a sacrifice to address them directly. The thing is, Marcus continued, you keep talking about this stuff like it's impossible. But my planet had lots of different kinds of people too. Different colors, different languages, different ways of believing in things. And most of the time we got along okay. Your planet was conquered in 6 months, Counselor Zane pointed out harshly. Marcus's face flushed, but he didn't back down. Because you had bigger ships. Not because you were better at being people. Just because you can break something doesn't mean it wasn't working. The rebuke hit harder than any military challenge could have. Zane had been present during the conquest of Earth and had seen the videos of human resistance. They had fought with incredible bravery despite being hopelessly outgunned, and their final transmissions had been messages of love to their families rather than curses for their enemies. High Counselor Theron raised a hand for silence. Commander Vex, in your opinion, is Morvoth still capable of protecting our empire? I believe so, High Counselor. Perhaps not in the way we assumed. But his reputation alone continues to deter most threats, and his knowledge of galactic politics spans millennia. He could be invaluable as an advisor even if his direct military capabilities are limited. And if we pursue this path of cooperation that he suggests? Vex was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. High Counselor, I've spent my entire career maintaining order through force, but I've also seen how much of our resources go towards suppressing rebellion rather than encouraging growth. If even half of what the Ancient One suggests is possible, we could have the strongest empire in galactic history, Marcus finished. Not because people are scared of you, but because they want to help you. The concept was so foreign to traditional Zephyrian thinking that most of the council couldn't even process it properly. Their entire civilization had been built on the principle that strength flowed from the ability to impose one's will on others. Bring him, Theron decided. Let us hear from Morvoth directly. The logistics of moving a dragon the size of a small mountain were staggering, but Morvoth had prepared for this possibility. When the council chamber's walls retracted to accommodate his presence, he had already reduced his visible size through an old draconic technique, compressing his form to merely enormous rather than incomprehensible. Even diminished, his presence filled the space with ancient power. His golden eyes swept across the assembled council members, reading centuries of fear and ambition in their faces. Honored counselors, Morvoth began, his voice carefully modulated to avoid the overwhelming resonance he usually employed. I come before you not as your terrible master, but as one who would be your partner in transformation. Ancient One, Theron said carefully. Commander Vex has briefed us on recent revelations. We must ask directly. Are you still capable of protecting our empire from external threats? That depends entirely on what form you wish that protection to take, Morvoth replied. If you seek the continuation of fear-based deterrence, then yes. My reputation alone will serve you for another century or two. But reputation fades, Counselor. What happens when the galaxy discovers that the terrible Morvoth is a wounded old dragon who hasn't destroyed a world in over a millennium? We face that reality now, Counselor Zane said bluntly. You've made yourself vulnerable by admitting weakness. No, Marcus interjected, surprising everyone by standing up to address the council directly. He's made himself strong by telling the truth. Now instead of pretending to be scary, he can actually help you figure out how to be better. Morvoth's massive head turned toward the boy with something that might have been gratitude. The child understands what many adults cannot. Strength built on deception is ultimately no strength at all. Then what do you propose? Theron asked. I propose that we begin with Haven, Morvoth said. Let a delegation visit the refugee world. See for yourselves what voluntary cooperation can accomplish. Learn from beings who have created something beautiful from the fragments of their broken lives. And if the experiment fails, then we will have lost nothing but pride and gained invaluable knowledge about the limits of cooperative governance. Marcus looked around the council chamber, seeing uncertainty and fear warring with curiosity in the faces of the Zephyrian leaders. My dad used to say that the only real failure was not trying when you had the chance to do something good. The words carried weight beyond their simple construction. Here was a child whose world had been destroyed, whose parents had been killed, whose own life hung in the balance, still advocating for hope and cooperation over vengeance and despair. You would trust us? Theron asked Marcus directly. After everything we've done to your people? Marcus considered the question seriously. I'd trust you to be better than you were. That's all anybody can really do. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the Zephyrian flagship Unity, watching as Haven came into view through the transparent aluminum windows. The planet looked exactly as Morvoth had described it. A blue and green jewel hanging in space, its surface unmarked by the geometric scars of military installations or industrial complexes. It's beautiful, breathed High Counselor Theron, who had insisted on leading the delegation personally. I hadn't expected it to look so peaceful. Beside her, Morvoth's holographic projection nodded with obvious pride. The dragon had remained on the capital world, but his consciousness could project across the galaxy when needed, a ability he had kept secret for millennia, but now used openly to facilitate communication. 2 million beings from 47 species, Morvoth said, and not a single military installation on the entire planet. They've proven that diversity doesn't require dominance to maintain order. Commander Vex, now bearing the new title of Cultural Liaison, studied the sensor readings with amazement. The agricultural output is incredible. They're feeding themselves with technology levels that shouldn't support a population this large. Cooperation multiplies efficiency, Marcus observed from his position at the window. Over the past months, he had become an unofficial advisor to the Transformation Committee, his insights valued precisely because they came from outside traditional Zephyrian thinking. What do they know about us? Asked Dr. Yira, the expedition's chief anthropologist. Do they understand that we're responsible for their exile? They know everything, Morvoth replied. I made no attempt to hide the truth about Zephyrian expansion or my role in protecting them from its consequences. They're aware that this delegation represents either the beginning of a new relationship or potentially the end of their sanctuary. Theron felt her chest tighten with unexpected anxiety. And they're still willing to meet with us? Marcus convinced them, Morvoth said with obvious affection for the boy. When I told them about the transformation you're attempting, about the possibility of an empire built on cooperation rather than conquest, they chose hope over fear. The landing was unlike anything the Zephyrians had experienced in their long history of planetary visits. Instead of military escorts and formal reception protocols, they were greeted by a diverse crowd of beings who seemed genuinely excited to meet them. Children of a dozen different species ran alongside their transport, waving handmade banners of welcome. Where's the security? Vex whispered, his training making him nervous about the lack of visible protection. They don't need security, Marcus explained. Nobody here wants to hurt anybody. The concept was so foreign to Imperial thinking that several delegation members struggled to accept it. How could a population of 2 million beings maintain order without weapons, without authority structures, without the constant threat of punishment? Their guide was Kayla, a former Zephyrian sacrifice who had been sent to Morvoth 30 years earlier. She had grown into a confident adult whose easy smile and obvious contentment challenged every assumption about the traumatic effects of Imperial conquest. Welcome to Haven, she said warmly. We've prepared a tour that will show you how our society functions, but please feel free to ask questions or explore on your own. We have nothing to hide. As they walked through the settlement, the delegation witnessed something unprecedented in their experience: genuine cultural fusion. Architecture that blended design elements from dozens of worlds, art that incorporated aesthetic traditions from across the galaxy, music that combined instruments and scales they had never heard together before. "How do you resolve disputes?" Theron asked as they passed a circular amphitheater, where beings of various species were engaged in animated discussion. "Through conversation," Kayla replied simply. "When conflicts arise, we bring everyone together and talk until we find a solution that works for everyone. But what if someone refuses to participate? What if they reject the consensus? Then we keep talking until we understand why. Usually rejection comes from fear or unmet needs. Once we address those, cooperation becomes possible." Dr. Yera was taking notes furiously. "And this works even with species that have historical animosity toward each other?" "It works especially well with those species," said Jorok, a former Andromedan engineer who had joined their group. "Shared hardship tends to overcome old prejudices. When survival depends on cooperation, you learn to value differences as strengths rather than viewing them as threats." Marcus ran ahead to where a group of children were playing a game that seemed to involve cooperation rather than competition. When he returned, his eyes were bright with excitement. They invented new games. Games where everybody wins. The simple observation hit the delegation like a thunderbolt. Even their children's entertainment was built around collaborative success rather than individual dominance. The implications for broader social structure were staggering. "Tell me about governance," Vex requested. "How do you make decisions that affect the entire population?" "The Council of Voices," Kayla explained, leading them toward a building that looked more like a library than a government center. Representatives chosen by each community, not to rule over others but to carry their concerns and ideas to the broader discussion. And if the council can't reach consensus, then we haven't talked enough yet. Sometimes it takes days, sometimes weeks, but every decision affects everyone, so everyone deserves to have their voice heard. Theron struggled to understand. "But emergencies? Crisis situations that require immediate response? We have response teams for natural disasters and similar events." But most emergencies in our old societies were really just problems that we'd been ignoring until they became critical. Here we address issues before they become crises. The tour continued for hours, revealing layer after layer of complexity beneath the surface simplicity. These weren't primitive beings living in happy ignorance. They were sophisticated individuals who had consciously chosen cooperation over competition, wisdom over power, sustainability over growth. As the day ended, the delegation gathered in the central plaza for a community meal. Thousands of beings shared food, stories, and laughter under the light of Haven's twin moons. Children played between the tables while adults engaged in conversations that spanned topics from stellar engineering to philosophical ethics. "I don't understand," Counselor Zane admitted quietly. "Where's the hierarchy? Who's in charge? How does anything get done without clear authority?" An elderly crystalline named Shard overheard the question and approached their table. "Authority is shared here, friend. Each of us leads in areas where we have knowledge and follows in areas where others know better. Leadership flows naturally to where it's needed most. But what prevents chaos? What stops individuals from pursuing their own interests at the expense of others? Self-interest is served by community welfare," Shard explained patiently. "When everyone prospers, I prosper. When the community is strong, I am safe and supported. Individual success without community health is ultimately self-defeating." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "It's like what my mom used to say about families. Everybody's stronger when everybody's happy." Theron found herself studying the faces around her, beings from worlds that the Zephyrian Empire had conquered, people who had lost everything to imperial expansion, individuals who had every reason to hate what she represented. And yet their expressions showed curiosity, warmth, even hope. "What do you want from us?" she asked Shard directly. "What would you have the Zephyrian Empire become?" The crystalline's faceted features reflected the flickering lights of the celebration as he considered his answer. "We want you to discover what we've learned here. That diversity strengthens rather than threatens unity. That cooperation creates more than competition. That an empire built on voluntary partnership is stronger than one maintained through fear. And if we fail, if our transformation attempts collapse into chaos, Then you'll learn something valuable about the limits of change, and you'll try again with better understanding. As the evening progressed, delegation members found themselves drawn into conversations with former enemies, sharing stories with beings they had been taught to view as inferior or dangerous. The artificial barriers that imperial ideology had constructed began to crumble under the weight of genuine human connection. Dr. Yira sat with a group of children who were teaching her their cooperative games. Commander Vex found himself discussing military theory with former resistance fighters who had developed entirely new concepts of defense based on community protection rather than territorial dominance. Theron herself ended up in deep conversation with a former high priest of Gorlak, a species that the Empire had nearly driven to extinction. Instead of resentment, she found wisdom. Instead of hatred, she discovered forgiveness. "You're not what I expected," the Gorlak admitted as their discussion wound down. "None of you are. Perhaps that's the first step toward becoming what you could be." When the delegation finally returned to their ship, they carried with them more than just data and observations. They carried a vision of possibility that challenged everything they thought they knew about power, governance, and the nature of strength itself. "Report?" Morvoth asked as his holographic form materialized in the ship's conference room.